Philadelphia Eagles quarterback coach Brian Johnson is the current favorite to land as the next offensive coordinator in this system. Man, some of y'all have been following me for a while know that this is a coach that I respect a lot. I thought that this was one of the best hirings, also an outside hiring from Nick Sirianni's staff when he originally constructed this thing back in 2021. This could be a solid hiring, guys. I'm very excited about what might come in the future here. Without further ado, let me give you some intel on this young man. All right, y'all. Let's get into this. What's up, Cerebral football fans? My name is Steven Hyder. This is Gate City Sports Channel. Look, Brian Johnson is a guy who played inside the pack, and I'm not a pack football guy. Most of their games come on when old Gate's gone to bed. With that said, I do know coaches when I hear their names kind of get thrown up. When you kind of follow them, you project what they're doing. And Brian Johnson is a very young man. When I say young man, keep this in mind, guys. On February 16th, this young man will turn 36 years old. The Eagles have a thing for trying to identify and scout out this young talent and get it under contract. And you better get this guy under contract as your OC or somebody else is going to. That's my theory here. So Brian Johnson begins as a 23-year-old quarterback coach back in 2010 for the University of Utah. I believe Utah Utes. He was working underneath Willingham's staff there. And basically, he primarily coached three quarterbacks at the University of Utah. 2010 season, it was primarily Jordan Wynn. 2011, it was a combination of Jordan Wynn, but mostly John Hayes. And in 2012 and 2013 seasons, he worked with Travis Wilson primarily. Now, I will say, going back, looking at some of the numbers, looking at some of the stats, Terrence Kane got involved in the 2010 season for them. And then also Adam Schultz in the 2012, 2013-ish range, he got some snaps as well. So 5 guys he's worked with inside of Utah, 3 of them primarily as the starters. By the time he was 25, actually I think it was a couple weeks before his 25th birthday at Utah, this young man was promoted from being the quarterback's coach to being the quarterback coach and offensive coordinator for that staff. That is a tremendous burden to carry as a 25-year-old. We talk about young men with old souls, and that, generally speaking, takes us into a conversation about Jalen Hurts. You can see Brian Johnson has that too. You can see that Brian Johnson is one of these young men with an old soul. Very responsible young man. At 25 years old, they're handing you offensive coordinator duties. That is a ton of trust, guys. That is a ton of trust for a guy that age. All right. For what most people know him for, come the 2014-2015 seasons, so 2 years, he gets hired at Mississippi State inside the SEC as the quarterback coach there. He ends up reuniting with Dan Mullen. Dan Mullen was kind of who recruited him to Utah when he was a player. We're going to get into this Dan Mullen conversation because I do think that he impacts some of the philosophy that we will see out of Brian Johnson. So, while he's there, he works with Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott ends up having career highs in attempts and completions and all kinds of stuff underneath of Brian Johnson. He did a phenomenal job with Dak Prescott. Dak ends up being a 4th-round pick, ends up going and playing quarterback for a rival. That's enough said about Dak, guys. We're not going to go too much. We're not going too much to Dak Prescott. You guys know the story. Following Dak Prescott's, entrance into the NFL, he would go on to work with Nick Fitzgerald at Mississippi State for a season. Not a whole lot to ideal-sized quarterback guy, 6'4", 6'5"-ish, 230-ish. He was an ideal, prototypical-sized quarterback. Had a fairly good season with Brian Johnson and then made a ton of mistakes at the quarterback position following Brian Johnson's departure to go take over as the OC and the quarterback coach at the University of Houston. At the University of Houston is where kind of the next big-name quarterback is that he works with, which is De'Aaron King. Not a whole lot here to talk about De'Aaron King, other than to say that, okay, now we're starting to see the dual threat quarterbacks come into play here a little bit. Definitely a bigger household name. De'Aaron King would go on to transfer from Houston and go to Miami and play in Miami for a little while. I think he's currently playing the XFL or something right now, guys. So I think the biggest thing you can say there is that once he left the University of Houston, right after one season serving there as the OC and the quarterback coach, he reunites with Mullins, Dan Mullins, at the University of Florida, and De'Aaron King gets out of town in terms of Houston and ends up transferring to the University of Miami, which I think kind of gives you some insight into how much they liked each other as coach and player. Fast forward, what most people probably know him for, which was 2017 through 2020. His stints there is originally the quarterback coach and then gets elevated in 2019 to the quarterback coach / offensive coordinator for the 1920 seasons for the Florida Gators. While he was here, this is when he really started crossing my radar personally. It was on that 2019 season and just kind of the job he did with Felipe Franks. I mean, 2018, he had Felipe Franks as well. But that first 4 games before Felipe Franks ended up, I think he suffered some sort of injury. But for like 4 games, I mean, Felipe Franks was just tearing up, the SEC. That guy was prototypical size, 6'5", 6'6", 230-ish. Same thing as Kyle Trask, who was the other quarterback he worked with the Florida Gators. Ideal prototypical size quarterbacks. But Felipe Franks was the one that I remember primarily even more than Kyle Trask. Kyle Trask had an incredible 2020 season underneath Brian Johnson. Call a spade here, man. Kyle Trask really had a great season in that 2020 year. But Felipe Franks had the arm. Felipe Franks had the ideal size. I mean, this guy, I remember a lot of the draft beatniks, they were all over Felipe Franks for a while. He ended up transferring out, went from Florida to Arkansas in the 2020 season. Yeah, he was decent there. If I remember correctly, too, he did pretty good there as well. And he was, never really materialized into anything, guys, but definitely like the prototypical size guy. Basically, he's got a track record of developing guys. Comes to the Eagles for 2021 and 2022 and works with Jalen Hurts. So from Jalen Hurts to Kyle Trask to Felipe Franks to Greg Ward Jr. to Dak Prescott to Travis Wilson, John Hayes, and Jordan Wynn. This young man has a track record of working with quarterbacks, being hired on originally as a quarterback coach, and before long, pretty much every coaching staff he's worked with going, whew, this dude's better than we thought, man. We might get this guy into like an actual responsibility position. And that's what I want to talk about is what influences Brian Johnson? What can we say? Look, he's followed Dan Mullins from Mississippi State over to Florida. So he's very much influenced by Dan Mullins' way of playing the box. Dan Mullins has a very concrete kind of philosophy about how you manipulate boxes, in college football. And he believes when you see a single high coverage thrown at your way, Dan Mullins works a lot of the RPO, a lot of the misdirection, a lot of that kind of stuff. And he believes in when I get that single high safety, my quarterback should be a factor in the running game. My quarterback should be able to manipulate you. My quarterback should be able to read you. My quarterback should make it hard for you to defend. We should be able to get +1 in the running game that way on you. When you go too high on us and you give us a light box, well, this is where our offensive line should be able to hit you with some trap plays. And he's pretty good at hitting you with trap plays. Dan Mullen's very big into the trap play aspect of steering his run game towards that. So that's where his offensive line gets dominant on you. But when you go zero, when you bring the blitz, that's where you saw guys like Felipe Franks really develop as a passer. That's where you saw guys like Kyle Trask really develop as a passer beating the blitz. And I will say Kyle Trask was a little suspect to me. And you guys remember when I broke down his film, I said, that guy's not very dynamic, man. He's not the greatest athlete in the world, to be quite honest. With that said, man, when they get the ball in their hands, they're special. And I think that could be the next advancement to our system and our quarterback. My God, we were absolutely freaking terrible at getting in those sight adjustments and those hot routes. Basically, see defender, replace freaking defender with the football type of offense here when we're, going up against blitzes and pressure packages. This is what I'm excited to see if there's a changing in the guard, a changing in the philosophy going forward with Jalen Hurts and going forward with Brian Johnson potentially as the offensive coordinator here in Philadelphia. That's what I'm personally excited to see here. That's where I think that you could see maybe some slight adjustments being made that might be a little different. Now, the other side to this story, the flip side to this story is, when he was in Florida, he may have had some responsibilities handed to him in terms of play calling. He may have called their 2-minute hurry-up offense style stuff, but it was primarily Dan Mullen's system. It was Dan Mullen's play calling from what I remember, guys. So I don't know that he actually has really any kind of real big-time experience. I don't know if the situation was in Houston. He may have called plays there. I don't know if he called plays in Utah when he was elevated to OC there in 2012 in the 2013 season. I don't know, guys. That's something that I'd have to look into, but that'd be the other question is, who's going to be the play caller here? Will they still allow their offensive coordinator, which would be Brian Johnson, to call plays and then have Nick Sirianni be still more of the executive style coach? If that's the direction we go with this hire, or is Nick Sirianni going to be more of the the play caller, and Brian Johnson's a little bit more of the like philosopher, the guy who's going to come up with some game plans, he's going to come up with some concepts. He's going to do more of that, putting the game plan together, putting the offense together. He's going to have like a say like Nick kind of did with Frank Reich, if you will. That's going to be the question in my opinion going forward, guys. But let me know your thoughts, y'all. This is a crazy situation, man. I'm a big Brian Johnson supporter. I hope this is what comes to fruition, guys. I would say Marcus Brady, former offensive coordinator for the Colts, former quarterback coach for the Colts, guy who knows Nick Sirianni, by the way. He might be your quarterback coach, guys. And then you got Brian Johnson being elevated to the OC. That would be my idealized situation personally. But all right, guys, I appreciate y'all's time and attention. And you already know what I'm going to say here, guys. See y'all on the next video.